Kinsey Schofield. Welcome to Royally Unfiltered, the show that takes you behind the palace gates like never before. We dive deep into the lives of the British royal family with exclusive insight from experts and insiders who know them best. Expect unfiltered opinions, controversial takes, and secrets that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about the monarchy. This is where tradition meets truth, and nothing is off limits. This week, helping me tackle all the biggest royal reports of the week, our historian and royal commentator and excellent author, Dr. Tessa Dunlop, and former royal correspondent at The Sun, royal commentator and author, and calendar boy, Charles Ray. This is the first time I've seen your handsome face in real life. It's so good to have you here, Tessa. You know I love you. Thanks so much for being here. Let's jump right into what everybody's going to be talking about over the next few days. Their Majesties are kicking off their tour in the land down under. We expect to see this, beautiful, incredibly expensive 4-minute display on the white sails of the Sydney Opera House, lit up with images from previous royal visits to mark the arrival of the monarch and Queen Camilla. One face that will likely be missing, Princess Diana. Tessa, talk to me about your piece in the Mirror. Of Australia, you said her gig, talking about Camilla, won't be easy. She has giant shoes to fill, and not just those of the late Queen. Can you elaborate?
Yeah, well, I wonder what Charles makes of this. It's just from those that I know in Australia. They've gone on a slightly different journey from us in Britain, where we've had 20 years of not just getting to know Camilla, but I think getting fond of her. There's been this extraordinary sort of arc of rehabilitation, this sort of idea of forgiveness, redemption, and then her becoming our queen. And we own her. I think we're quite proud of her now in this country and all that she's managed. But in Australia, they haven't had that arc, led predominantly, incidentally, by the tabloids in Britain, where others fall in behind. They tend to lead the royal narrative here in Britain. And there hasn't been that story in Australia, who incidentally were going on a very different, fairly Republican journey in the 1980s, when along comes Diana, totally upends the ambitions of the then Prime Minister to basically overturn their constitutional monarchy and boot out the Queen, because everyone falls in love with Diana. Diana mania, it's akin to Beatlemania. The police have to ratchet up their presence by 25% because all the roads are blocked. I mean, sure, Charles, you were probably there. You can remember it better than me. And they absolutely fell in love with her. And I think that kind of other woman narrative is still kicking in around there in a way that it no longer does. And of course, Harry, his relatively recent trip to Australia in 2018, his bad-mouthing his stepmother, none of this really makes it easy for Camilla at the moment over there.
Well, I mean, Charles, how do you respond to that? Will Queen Camilla recognize that ghost, or have her priorities changed due to the king's illness? I mean, some of this stuff might seem irrelevant to her.
I think Camilla will be treating this trip with great trepidation, given I totally agree with everything that Tessa has just said. And it will be interesting to see how she copes with it. More importantly, it will be interesting to see how the Australians cope with her, because she's not just there as the Duchess of Cornwall, she is now there as the Queen, and their Queen as well. Forget about the Republican movement just for a moment. So it'll be interesting to see how they react to it. Now, I can only go by the trips that I have done to Australia, which have been a fair few with various members of the royal family. And all I can say to you is, every time a member of the royal family goes to Australia or goes abroad to another country, the crowds come out. And it'll be interesting to see the contrast between what a few Republicans, and I'm not trying to denigrate what the Republicans are saying, they're entitled to their own opinion and what they want to do. But it'll be interesting to see how they cope, and how the vast majority of Australians will cope and in seeing their king. And the last time he was there is 2018. And as you rightly said, Harry was there as well in 2018, but William was there in 2014. And each time they have been there, these crowds have, they've been 10, 12 deep in the streets, flag waving, cheering, drowned out any possibility of any Republican movement. Now, I know that the Republicans are jumping up and down. They always do, particularly in Australia. But the Prime Minister over there, who is, a Republican himself, he's got a big problem because he can't even get a referendum to give the indigenous population, the political rights that other people have got in Australia. So they've got to deal with that first before you get down to the nitty gritty of, do we kick the monarchy out or not?
No, I was just going to say the poor old Aboriginals' failure in Australia has actually been a weird silver lining for royalty, because they've effectively sidelined the idea of having a referendum on the monarchy. And of course, the last time there was one was in the late 1990s, and the royals just took it.
Maybe I'm being sensitive here, Tessa, but when we talk about the Australian Republican movement and this campaign they've launched, branding this visit as a farewell tour with merchandise, I mean, based on, but based on his current health, I feel like, Tessa, tell me if you agree, but I feel like this is a little below the belt.
I think that's where, and I love your emotion, Kinsey, and I love your passion, but that is where I think we slightly have to separate the institution of monarchy from the person of Charles himself. And I thought it was quite clever. I mean, inevitably, his press secretary, his private secretary, just released the reply, that the king will go along, with whatever Australia chooses, as you would expect, as is his constitutional position. But this isn't so much about Charles as the individual, it's more about Australia, as the Republicans would say, putting on their big pants and finding their own head of state. It helps, I think, when there's been a change at the top, and it makes it softer. If you've had the Queen putting in decades of service since that mega tour in 1954, it would have been pretty rude in her last decade to elbow her out. But I think for many Republicans, they feel, when there's a changing of the guard in Britain, why not have a reshuffle down under? But I don't think, you don't need to worry too much, because I don't think it's going to happen.
That's a great point. Charles, haven't Cher and the band Kiss proven that a farewell tour is just a great way to build anticipation and excitement around someone?
Well, I don't think it's going to be a farewell tour, at all. I mean, any referendum that comes along, it's years down the line. It's not going to happen next year. It's not going to happen the year after. So it's going to be years down the line. I mean, Charles may never make another trip to Australia. He's 76, 77 this year. I mean, he's getting on a little bit now. He may make another trip, but I expect William to go back down there again, and that would thrill the Australians like you wouldn't believe. Now, just speaking about the Republican movement for a second, they've got their, as you quite rightly said, they've got merchandise, just as the Republican movement in this country have got their yellow shirts, not my king, not in my lifetime. An interesting thing is that the British head of Republic in this country is actually going to be in Australia, geeing up the Australians to try and get them kicked out. Now, that's a man called Graham Smith, who's a very passionate Republican. But, you have to think there is a Republican movement in this country. It's, no matter what he says, it's a very small movement. And I suspect, I saw a guy this morning, some guy who comes from the Australian Republican movement this morning, and what he really needs is he needs a shave and a bath, to be perfectly honest, to come on TV again. Honestly, if that's the best they've got, then we've got no problems.
That is hilarious.
I also think a lot of the kind of debate, the narrative around this, it puts a touch paper, if you like, under Australia. It's in the headlines over here in Britain. You're talking about it stateside, Kinsey. There's something that you get a little bit extra by having a head of state that's piloted in. I know in many ways it's not ideal if you're in Australia feeling you want your own person. But on the other hand, isn't the role of a king to actually shine the light on Sydney Opera House, on what's going down in Canberra? Isn't Charles, in a way, because of this narrative and this division almost, isn't he doing his job, bringing oxygen to the Australian nation?
Oh my, look at you. I mean, mic drop. What a beautiful way to phrase that. Charles, you mentioned the other man in my life. Let's talk about Prince William. In a two-part documentary titled Prince William, Weaken and Homelessness, Prince William has responded pretty humbly and confidently when cornered and questioned about his privilege. Tessa, I don't need word for word, obviously, but essence did he reply? And did you approve of that reaction? I mean, basically he says, I came with no other agenda but, to do good.
I think, it's a shame really that the head of state has to be apolitical, because it was a very politically astute reply. I was sitting in a television studio talking about something totally different with two big hitting politicians. And all of us, it came up in the news headlines last night, and all of us were pretty impressed with the way he just kind of ducked that curveball entirely. He didn't even go there. Obviously, the journalist in question was needling over his houses. He has Amner Hall in Norfolk, for those who don't know the list. He has Adelaide Cottage. He also has the A1 apartment in Kensington Palace. Not to mention, of course, he's the Duke of Cornwall now, so he's got £1 billion worth of, property and estates, etc., sprinkled all over the country. So we all know that he has a bonkers number of houses, but he just basically stood back from that and said, look, I'm all about dealing with this issue. He removed himself from the ballpark, and I thought did so very effectively.
I mean, Kinsey, what first attracted you to the billionaire Prince William? I mean, I find it hard to believe. But now, to be serious for a second, the homelessness issue for Prince William, this is not just a hobby horse. I mean, this is a passion. This is a passion that was instilled in him by his own mother, who took him on, sleepouts, and he's done sleepouts as an adult and everything else. But William cannot do this job on his own. He can lobby, he can do all sorts of things, but he can't do the job of fixing homelessness in this country. We have a terrible problem with homelessness, but we need to have proper government, and proper local councils need to step in and do more. And so if he is spearheading that cause, then maybe, hopefully, these idiots that rule us and all over the place may well listen to something and actually do something. Our government's got an awful lot of problems on its plate in any case. So, I mean, homelessness is just another one. But William, this is not, as I say, a hobby horse. This is a real passion for William, and he will do his damnness, to try to do his best to help people who have no home to go to and who are in the streets, living under conditions that's dreadful.
Really quickly, I just wanted to ask you, Charles, because I have studied some of your coverage of Princess Diana. You talked about weeping in the streets after her funeral. I thought that was so beautiful. But covering Princess Diana, is it nice to see William inherit this passion but make it his own? It seems very authentic.
Well, I have to say, Kinsey, that part of me still wishes Princess Diana was around today, because I think we wouldn't have half the problems that we've actually got in the royal family. And you know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about William and Harry and their arguments. So that's one. I mean, I loved covering Princess Diana, basically because I was getting stories in the paper every day, and my name was in the paper every day. I mean, I've never taken a drug in my life, but that's the closest I will ever get to having a fix. I promise you, just seeing my name in the paper, it is absolutely one of the best things that you could ever have. I mean, covering her was a great joy. And you talked about, I remember, and one of the things that annoyed me about her death was the various psychologists and psychiatrists who sort of condemned people for breaking down. These are people who, some of them may never have met this woman at all, but she struck a chord with them. And I remember, vividly everything that went on, at the time when she died, and I was working practically 24 hours a day right up into the funeral. And I'll make an admission now, Kinsey, and that is that after the funeral, when I was walking down the street, and it was a Saturday, and on those days we didn't have a paper on the Sunday. It's changed now. But I remember walking away, seeing all these hundreds of thousands of people lining the street. I found a quiet corner, and I cried. And I'm supposed to be a roughy-toughy Scot, who doesn't get affected by any of this. But that's the only time I've ever felt emotional about anyone I've covered in the royal family.
That is so sweet. Tessa, I respond to that, and also I'm sorry that I interrupted you earlier. Let me allow you to finish your thought.
No worries. It's the slight delay, I think. Because although you feel like you're right with me here, you're in fact thousands of miles away, Kinsey. Funnily enough, it was the first time I ever broadcast was on the day of Diana's funeral. I was working for a radio station, Virgin, and it was just the time when those brick mobile phones were out, and somebody said, could you go and get people's response? And I remember we don't have the Sabbath in the way that we used to, even when I grew up in the 70s. But that day was like one of those really old-fashioned Sundays, wasn't it, Charles? You could hear a pin drop on the street. It was extraordinary. I will never forget it. And the emotion, and it was a way, I think, of course, the royal family, they're our first family. In many ways, they're internationally the first family. And we project our own emotions, our own loss against the natural order, the people that we've loved and lost. And that's quite normal. That's the way of things. But Diana was something more than that. We all felt that we had a bit of her, rightly or wrongly. And I think what's interesting, and to track back to our original conversation about Camilla in Australia, it is so difficult. Imagine, and I thought this at the coronation, and I was surprised, out of respect, I guess, for our new queen, no one mentioned it. But imagine Diana, imagine the queen in her early 60s, this good-looking, glamorous woman. Imagine the kind of queen she would have been. And it's almost, I think, too difficult to talk about because it is painful. But that's who we miss. And if we miss her, then of course William and Harriet's a crater in their lives, and they've played it out as a crater recently.
Oh, how devastating. Crater in their lives. What a brilliant and heartbreaking way to describe that. Well, since you guys brought him up, let's just head on into Harry zone. Tessa, the Daily Mail is reporting that Prince Harry and Meghan Markle have purchased a new home in Portugal, coined a vacation home. Some royal watchers are asking, a vacation from what? These two hardly ever work. I give you the floor, girlfriend. Say what you gotta say.
Come on. I mean, I don't work with my husband. For goodness sake, Charles, do you work with your wife? Do you have a wife? I mean, we think we need to cut them a bit of slack there. What do you reckon? Do you think their marriage is okay, Charles? Come on, give us your thoughts.
Oh, well, I have not seen any evidence to suggest that their marriage is on the rocks at all. Okay, what I have seen is they are separate in their businesses, and it's about time too, because they've gone so far. You can only make enough money slagging off your royal relatives for a period of time. After that, it gets boring, as we have seen. It's been boring. They're continually whinging about all sorts of things. Now, it's great to see Harry back again, doing what we think he does best, and that is with the charities, with Well Child, with Lesotho, Centre Bali. It's great to see him doing all that sort of thing. You could see physically he was really enjoying it. Now, I've seen clips of him being with his wife at these events, and he looks like he's been led. He's like a bull being led by his nose on a ring, by her. And I think it's right that they have split their business side of it. Now, if they're now buying a place in Portugal, I would suggest that the marriage is not actually heading for the divorce course just yet. I mean, even with the help that he's probably getting from Eugenie's husband, who is a consultant or a representative of the area that he's probably going to buy this place. I mean, they like Portugal, and this thing about this is going to give them some golden visa ticket to the Schengen. It's rubbish. I mean, Harry can come here anyway at any time. He doesn't need a visa to come here. He is a British. On the other hand, Meghan would still need a visa. However, she will never need a visa because, in my view, this woman is never going to set foot back in the UK ever again.
I think that's a good point. Tessa, do you have a reaction?
Well, I think there might be a little bit of Yahoo stars. We'll just hop over Britain and hang out in Portugal. There is a bit of, couple of fingers. Maybe. I wouldn't entirely blame them. We've not exactly given Meghan and Harry a great big love hug, have we?
No,
and you might not be aware.
I'm sorry, Tessa. No, I'm sorry.
You might not be aware of this, Kinsey, but there's been a massive kerfuffle here in Britain because Taylor Swift got the blue light security treatment for her Ezra's tour in Wembley, greenlit apparently by the Prime Minister, and we didn't or don't accord the same to our homegrown Prince Harry and his wife. So I think that with justification, they may take a little umbrage and hop across the other side onto the continent, where the weather, let's face it, is a little better anyway.
Well, that's not strictly true, Tessa, because the last time Harry was here, before he came for his uncle's funeral, he actually had a blue light escort from the airport. Now, this guy doesn't have to go through the regular customs. You know, he hops off down the steps on the plane on airside, gets into a darkened Range Rover with a police escort into his hotel room at the Royal Lancaster. So he gets all that. And, you know, even if he has his own private security, the Metropolitan Police, you know, one of their jobs is to look out for possible threats that there are against a VIP like Harry. And they would then tell his own private security. Now, when Harry comes here and is actually with other members of the royal family, he gets royal protection. He's in a secure zone and he gets that royal protection. So it's absolute, with the greatest of respect, Tessa, it's absolutely rubbish to suggest that he doesn't get anything. I mean, this is a guy who gets quite a lot.
That is an important thing we should keep in mind. It's based on his request. He has to give them, I think, 28 days notice, and they determine whether or not they'll give him that security access he wants. But, you know, Tessa, speaking of security, I know this is kind of a bizarre question, but statistically, Portugal is actually one of the safest places in the world. Could Harry and Meghan, you know, inevitably relocate there? Or is this just going to be a playhome?
No, she's a Californian girl. I can't believe you asked that, Kinsey, as a fellow American.
I don't know. I mean, they might be running her out of here soon. I don't know.
Well, you know, just a little bit of I went into KP, Kensington Palace, the other day. Different story. I'll divulge more at a later date. And I know, right? But I did think, I just couldn't really see Meghan in there. She is an American. I think we all lay different layers of kind of why it all fell apart and it didn't work. I just think it was oil and water, the super old school, slightly entitled blue blood royal family, okay, who've never changed their ways since, you know, 1066 or whatever, versus Little Miss, and I say this with, you know, as a fellow ambitious female, quite sharp-elbowed Hollywood, meritocratic, climbing up the tree, you know, actually the two were never going to meet in the middle. Right. And so it's just a reminder, I suppose, what I'm trying to say there is that she's 100% American. And she, of course, they all love, or many of you love to come over on holiday to Europe, darling, to do the continent. But it won't ever be more than a little soupçon a couple of weeks a year, I don't think.
With the greatest respect to Americans, Kinsey.
Oh, here we go.
We've only had two American women who've tried to come into the royal family, and they've both ended in disaster. One king had to abdicate as a result of wanting to marry an American. But let me just tell you something. I mean, you know, when you look at Diana and Fergie, the Duchess of York, when they come into the royal family, they were left to fend for themselves. They had no protection. And there was always this talk of the men in the grey suits, you know, who were putting objects in their way to prevent them from doing this. Well, I'm telling you now, and it changed certainly with Catherine, because William would never, ever allow any of these toffee-nosed twits, you know, to put anything in the way of Catherine. And it's the same with Meghan. Now, when you saw Meghan come into this royal family, she got so much help that she rejected. The Queen even, well, no, Tess, you shake your head, but the Queen offered, you know, Lady Susan Hussey, at that time, her premier lady in waiting, to help her out.
Samantha Cohen was excellent.
They mentioned Samantha Cohen as an asset to help her out. And, you know, Charles even helped walk her down the aisle part of the way. And wasn't it funny how lopsided the wedding parties were, you know, when you looked at the royal side and then you looked at the Meghan side, and it was her mother, you know, that was it.
She had George Clooney, like who she'd never met before. Let's keep it straight.
Had she met Oprah by then, by the way?
Yeah, I think she had. I think that scheme was already in process.
I think but I think my broader point was that it wasn't ever going to work, because she's a Californian girl, and that is such a different model. It's an entirely different petri dish. And if you take them both as sort of weird social experiments, one from, you know, a millennia ago and the other one more recently in the 20th century, they're just very, very different. And It's interesting, I thought, in Harry's book Spare, when he writes that William, his brother, said, "Oh, an American actress," a bit like the words convicted felon. I thought, because William was kind of with an element of knowing, thinking, I just can't see that working. And it didn't. And it doesn't really, it's nothing against Meghan. It was just two very different cultural structures. That's what I think.
And if he said that, Tessa, he was trying to protect his brother, who he thought was just racing at the marriage. And now let me just pick you up on something else as well. And that is that when Meghan and Harry first started doing royal duties, everywhere they went, the crowds that we were talking about that turned out in Australia were the same. The British crowds were turning out in Nottingham, Liverpool, everywhere they went. They were taking Meghan to their hearts. Now, the only one who decided that she didn't like it anymore was Meghan. And the reason why Meghan didn't like it, she may have been a B-list star in Hollywood, but she wasn't going to be an A-list star in the UK. She had to take her turn. She had to be in the pecking order. And the pecking order is below the King and below the Prince of Wales. And I mean, why she didn't settle for that, I don't know.
But had she been patient, she would have been an A-lister this year.
Absolutely.
She would have stepped in for Charles. She would have stepped in for Catherine. And
the country would have loved the couple for it. Loved them.
Tessa, you disagree with us. Tell us why.
Because she was always going to be a B-lister, and because she's from that sharp-elbowed Hollywood world, and she thinks, she probably thought, I'm better at this than most of them. You know, the old people have been around for ages. You know, I look better. She probably, I mean, you know, she's an actress, for goodness sake. She knows how to carry herself and how to speak in public and so forth. And she realised she was never going to have the top gig. And actually, as soon as William and Kate's children start having children of their own, hers are totally muscled out of the picture. We know that. Can you, for example, even name Princess Margaret's children? Well, probably you two can, but you get my broader point. That actually, as the royal family expands, the side acts are shuffled out. So I have a degree of sympathy, but on the question of those crowds being 6 inches deep or 6 lines deep, that's what worries me in Australia, is that the last royals who were in Australia were Harry and Meghan, and a bit like in Britain, where the young flocked towards them. They saw themselves in this couple, even though they're not actually that young. They rushed towards them. And it's a bit of a jolt, isn't it? Well, actually now, after all of that, here you are, old Charles and Camilla. And by the way, P.S., lest we forget, William didn't bother rocking up to Australia for the women's football final a couple of years back.
I hate to change the subject too much, but this is our last topic. I hope you guys are ready to continue with this energy. I'm loving this energy. Last but not least, in the good, the bad, and the rugby, Unleashed, nice name. This book's going to be unleashed, released October 24th. Mike Tyndall, son-in-law of Princess Anne, is the co-author with rugby rock star James Haskell, and they seem to take a swipe at Omen Scobby, maybe even Harry and Meghan in the grand scheme of things. Charles, James says royal fans can be mental, adding that we all know that American royal fans are beeping nuts, especially Scobbyites. I would argue that if you're a fan of Omen Scobby, then you're not a very good royal fan. I consider him a very destructive personality. Where do you stand on this topic?
Omen who? No, I don't. I mean, I've got no time for Omen Scobby. I don't watch any of his Twitter account. I mean, I agree with James Haskell, because believe you me, anytime I say anything at all about Meghan or Harry, my Twitter feed gets the Sussex squad just try. I mean, I'm not bothered. I'm big enough and ugly enough to look after myself. So I couldn't care less what they say. But that's the danger of social media. Years and years and years ago, before social media, Kinsey, we used to get what we would call the nutters writing to us, and you could always tell their letters because they were always in green ink. You know,
yes.
You know, they were just mad, and there were screeds and screeds of
yes.
unmanageable words and everything else. And this is now what's happened now with social media. You are allowing the brainless a platform to speak, and they don't listen to what's going on. And that is the problem with social media, that some people put something up about Harry and Meghan, and it's inevitably wrong, but it goes wide and everybody jumps on it, and they start castigating people like me. Okay, I'm not a total expert, but I know a lot more about the royal family than quite a few of my people who write who slag me off on social media. But I mean, people like Omen Scobby do damage. They do an awful lot of damage, and I don't think we should pay any attention to him. I blot him out, to be perfectly honest.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you, Tessa. Is this a beehive worth kicking? Do you wonder what the objective was here to include this? Because I would have kept this on the cutting room floor. I wouldn't have even gone here.
Yeah, it did seem an odd addition, because I would think that the book had to be quite carefully edited. We know that, I mean, he went into the jungle, didn't he? And so forth. And it was coming from James, not Mike. But still, why go there at all? I do think he flagged up an interesting point, and I seem to get attacked from both sides, incidentally, whether it's the Sussex squad or I don't do anything right, or the royal ones. I offend everyone, seemingly.
I get you. I'm the same way.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. But what it demonstrates, and I think it's one of the great tragedies, is that where previously, before social media, and particularly when we had the unifying force of the late Queen, the royal family did sit at their best above politics. And now the great tragedy of the fallout between the two siblings and everyone feeling they have to take sides and muscle up in one camp or the other. Let's face it, every human being is flawed. There's probably a truth somewhere lying in the middle, but that doesn't sell papers or get clicks. The great tragedy is we've dragged our royal family down into this politically divisive sort of identity culture. And I think it's a very great shame, and I don't quite know where the solution lies, to be honest.
Well, I mean, I feel like it started, a lot of it's, I know you're going to be mad at me for saying this, but Meghan Markle didn't help when she started dragging racism and some of like her very, I mean, political. I wouldn't even use the word woke. She didn't hesitate to get political, and I felt like that probably took the royal family in a difficult direction.
Well, exactly, which goes back to my point. Ne'er the twain would meet. Her whole that whole cultural vibe she came with from America included her quite formed political voice. Very different from when Kate married into the royal family. She'd done 10 years waiting, biding her time, training, learning how to respect this apolitical institution. Whereas Meghan had been doing her own thing right through to her mid-30s.
Tessa, I don't know. Meghan, in my view, only discovered that she was of mixed race when she came over here. Let's not forget that when no, it's a valid point. When she put down her CV for her acting, she put it down as Caucasian. So she's got to make up her mind exactly what she is on this. And just one other thing on this book about James Haskell and Mike Tyndall. Mike Tyndall, who's come into the royal family and who's quite a decent guy. And these comments by James Haskell, as this book is both co-authored by him and Mike Tyndall, do you think that Mike Tyndall would have objected to this at all? No, I don't. He would have agreed what Haskell was saying. Otherwise, he'd be in the book.
Yeah, I know. I guess my question is, that this can be a really nasty and toxic space, and it almost attracts more of that attention, and I wouldn't do it. So I guess that was my question. But Tessa, I want you to respond to the race thing, because I know we're going to get in trouble for that comment. So just go ahead.
As a woman of color in Hollywood, trying to make her way, however Meghan chose to identify at whatever stage in her career, that's entirely her own prerogative. But there is no denying she is a woman of color, and as far as I've been aware, she's always been very proud and very vocal about that from being a child, when she had a single parent mum who was a black woman and took the shtick that came with being a black woman at that time where they lived. So I think there's no questioning Meghan's identity, and I think if you ask most people of color, especially young women of color, they feel that Meghan for them is someone who they can rely on to give them a voice, and that's important. It is important, and I know people, especially of your generation, dare I say it, Charles, might find the whole kind of identity culture exhausting, but it's very real for those who are living it and who are finding their way.
I don't find it exhausting at all. It doesn't bother me in the slightest what colour people are. I couldn't care less. But she's the one who keeps making it a point, not me. She's the one who keeps making it an issue. She's the one who accused someone in the royal family of making what she described as a racist comment.
I think, give people 100 people an experience and all come away and tell it 100 different stories. It was very much her truth, and it is a very old, very white institution, the monarchy.
It is a very white institution.
Her reading, it is, and I'm not blaming them for that, but that must have been something of a culture shock for Meghan. And I think that the less said, the better now moving forward regarding that incident. And I noticed the royal family are doing that.
Tessa,
but with regards to James, I think he's a bit of a troublemaker, by the way, that James rugby player, because he goes on programs and talks about, all people being woke and stuff. And then in the same breath talks about the need for good mental health. So I think Mike Tyndall needs to find a better companion for his next book.
Well, but I mean, you talked about her truth. We now know that some of her truth was actually a pack of lies. Let's not forget that. No. You look at the Oprah Winfrey thing again, and you look at... Right. I fell off my seat when she said that they'd got married 4 days before the actual wedding in Windsor. What she meant was they had a rehearsal, but she actually said they got married 4 days beforehand. And I thought, Christ, we all missed that one.
Yeah, hopefully there was somebody there to ice your bottom.
This is where I'm going to put my little Doctor of History hat on and say I write predominantly oral history, mainly from women who served in World War II and other military personnel. And what they tell me, and I record it and I write it down, and then I go and try and match it with actual factual accounts of what happened. And there is always a disparity. The way we remember is inaccurate. And I think it doesn't do any of us any favours to label someone a liar. It was just her version of events.
I accept what you're saying, Tessa, but I still don't see how you can mistake getting married in a huge, great big ceremony, which is costing you and me hundreds of thousands of pounds, with getting married 4 days ago with just her and Harry and the Archbishop. It's ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous, and it's not the first lie she got caught out.
I think we can agree to disagree on some of these things. I think that there's truth to both of what you're saying. But Dr. Tessa Dunlop, Charles Ray, thanks so much for spending time with me today. Excellent analysis. Whether you agree with us, disagree with us, make sure you leave a comment below, like, subscribe, and share this video with a friend. Thanks so much for watching. I did have so much fun with you two. I'm Kinsey Schofield.